Hello, everyone. We're happy to have Lucia Gallardo here with us today. Lucia, thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
Thanks so much for having me. I am doing great. It's a rainy day, so I think it's perfect to sit in and do an interview on one of my favorite topics.
Yeah, perfect. That's a perfect vibe for the interview, I believe. And my first question is, what are the benefits of Web3 technology compared to traditional web technology?
That's a good question because I think fundamentally it's changing dynamics of the web in ways that are very on trend with where society seems to be going. There seems to be, post-pandemic, post-economic, slump of the 2008 era. I think there's been like greater calls for financial sovereignty and an understanding of what role the individual plays within a grander financial system. And I think, Web3 obviously presents lots of opportunities for users to understand that. On top of that, I think there are calls for consolidated trust or conditionality of trust. And so, in the ways that we do business with each other, peer-to-peer, not getting scammed off, a third-party website, in the way that we don't have to disclose all of this information to these websites that then share it and commodify it. So what are the conditions under which trust takes place across the web? And then I think greater visibility and accountability into data and information management. And so I think all of these things are essential pieces that are, in demand by internet users all around the world. And I think that Web3 provides, some very interesting tooling and some very interesting infrastructure for these things to take place. And then I think the last one that's also very much on trend is on the governance side, more participatory models in decision making. And I think it's a refreshing thing. It's a great benefit that Web3 has the potential to offer, but not necessarily, cause and effect. So I think we have to be very careful with how we sell Web3 and making sure that we, say that the potential is there, but design is very important and governance is very important. And all of those are conditions into what benefits ultimately end up in the hands of the users.
Okay, that's perfect. And what are the key differences between Web2 and Web3 technology?
Many a difference. I think fundamentally we're talking about a new way of organizing data and organizing metadata. Web3 has really, really thorough indexing and searchability potential in relation to the way that data is collected, stored, kept, managed, shared, etc. across the web. I think that's probably the most precedent-setting differentiator. And then what that does is it opens up opportunities for how information can travel and be used and how exchange can happen across the web. And that includes, of course, value exchange, which blockchain is very, very well known for. But I think the fundamental difference is this idea that we have an indexing opportunity for data and metadata, and that can create precedents for trust in, exchange, value exchange. It can create precedent for encrypted communications. It could be, precedent setting for the ways that we become identifiable on the web and how we protect identifiable traits and behavior that is inherently ours, and then how that ultimately becomes commodifiable by us. And so I think the fundamental differences are really in this infrastructure that provides potential and opportunity to change fundamentally the way information is collected, stored, managed, shared, commodified, and that inherently provides opportunities for individuals to then be able to leverage that to their advantage.
Okay, and what are the most important skills for a Web3 developer to have?
I think that it just depends on where they sit in terms of what they want to build, right? I think there's so many tools and platforms that are needed in order for a blockchain ecosystem to function well, that, it just depends what you want to focus on. So if you are a person that wants to focus on the usability of blockchain protocols, then, understanding user behavior and experiences and making sure that you have diverse perspective in design, I think is really important. If you want to develop something that is more for interoperability, then, understanding oracles is a very important skill set, and being able to understand the different specific languages that perhaps a blockchain protocol might require, whether it's Solidity or something else. And then if you are someone that is more focused at the dApp level or at the DeFi level, then making sure that you understand the mechanics of, what staking and yielding and smart contracts and all of these conditionalities that are required for the effective deployment of any particular dApp or or a DeFi instrument. And then if you're on the storage side, really understanding, the vertical architecture of blockchain ecosystems, and making sure that we understand that just because it's on a blockchain protocol, it doesn't mean that every level of infrastructure is decentralized. And at the moment, we have options like IPFS, but most projects today, I think, are using centralized storage. And so if you're on, the back end or data management side of things, and understanding the skills that are related to information management in a decentralized aspect, I think is really important. So I think it just depends where you want to sit in this journey. There's a lot of opportunity, and there are also skills that you need to bring in that are not specifically technical, but in understanding, again, diverse user experiences and the ways in which technology infrastructure is varied across different regions or across different population segments. If we truly want a universal Web3 ecosystem, then it needs to have all of these considerations, not just in like the human side of blockchain teams, but also even the developers need to think about this as well. So I think there's this question can go in any direction depending on where you want to fit within the blockchain ecosystem.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And what are the key challenges you've faced when working on Web3 projects?
Ooh, how long do we have? Yeah. I think there's been a lot. I think principally when we're starting off, I think a big element is combating a lot of the simplified narrative around blockchain and its practicalities. I think a lot of people still have trouble differentiating a blockchain from a token, from an NFT, from a so on and so forth. And so I think a big question, because in my case, a lot of my clients are government clients or institutions or nonprofits, or they might be businesses, but they're, still traditional businesses. And so I think a big piece has been getting them to understand the value that different blockchain tools can provide without necessarily going this fast money, volatile or speculative market route, which I think still is a conflicting narrative for people that are interested in the technology, but perhaps skeptical at the ways they sort of see regulators going after certain types of projects, from top shots to exchanges to so on and so forth. So I think one of the biggest barriers has been this idea of, how to get people to see beyond these hype cycles of media and understand truly the value of potential that exists within the many tools and options within a robust blockchain ecosystem. I think infrastructurally, of course, there's, a lot of competitiveness between the protocols, and, we want to see multi-blockchain approaches and projects, but that means that it requires a very concerted effort of blockchain protocols to actually enable that, and innovators to come in and facilitate that, technically speaking. And then I think a big piece of this has also been just the user experience. I think there's huge adoption curves for people that have, that are going from little or limited technology to suddenly being responsible for so much of their digital footprint and their digital life, because inherently this brings about sovereignty, of course, but there's a learning journey that needs to take place, and many users are still struggling with that around the world. So I think those are the three elements that I would say have presented the most amount of pushback in trying to drive some of these projects around the world.
Okay, and what advice do you have for companies looking to adopt Web3 technology?
Obviously, I'm very biased and totally complicit in saying, yes, you should adopt it and to look into it with seriousness. But I think a big piece of this is understanding, what the true value propositions of the technology is, inherently tethered to what their strategic outlook is. So, if they see a roadmap in which they want, for example, financial instruments that relate to some of their core competencies, if they want participatory models with some of their most loyal consumers, if they want to experiment with, adding different types of revenue models that may come from, ESG aligned objectives such as carbon credits or biodiversity credits, if they are looking at these kinds of things, automation and, improvements along their supply chain, if they're looking at contract negotiation with automated conditionality. So I think all of these things are inherently very useful for companies, but it requires thoughtfulness in this approach. And so I think a patient strategy and a very well thought out strategy and roadmap before engaging in it, I think is super, super important. And I also think, to do diligence on the minds that they're bringing in, to look at the trajectory of how they've designed and deployed projects and what that track record is. And I think, just creating like a room full of go-to brains that's very trusted and very helpful. I think those two steps of having a strategic long-term objective and having the right minds in the room is probably the best way to start on a strategy. Inventiveness and experimentation are just so critical in this day and age, because a lot of the world is taking place online, and a lot of the world is seeking to be entertained and also be, seeking to have remuneration, and also seeking to have their rights protected, and also seeking to make sure that they don't damage our resources in our world even more. And so there's all of these demands in what is a changing landscape of consumers. And so I think businesses would be smart to consider the ways in which blockchain tools and infrastructure can facilitate them meeting these goals and this new market. But at the same time, I think it requires just very methodical thinking and inventiveness within what is long-term vision. And that can be done, with the strategy that they have in place, long-term without blockchain, and then incorporating blockchain into some of that, and then also sort of leveraging the technology itself through expert minds and trusted minds in order to study what new ways and new pathways are made available due to the inclusion of this infrastructure into their roadmap.
Okay, and also speaking about security risks, I heard there are a lot of risks associated with Web3 technology. Can you tell me what are the main security risks associated with this technology and how do you address them?
I mean, there are many. Like any given technology, the smart contracts are a vulnerability, the exchanges are a vulnerability, anything that has some kind of centralized administrative function or centralized repositories of anything is really at risk of, not being the most secure. But I think primarily the biggest risk, and it's actually not even unique to blockchain, but the biggest risk is always the user. Right? How they manage their password, how they, enable 2FA or don't, how they might, leave any passcodes or anything around, how they might manage the security of their own devices, how they might have cross-device, automated sharing, password sharing, and things like that. So I think a big risk factor that we have to factor in is just what is the way in which we factor in all of the ways in which users could possibly pose a risk to their own data, because obviously we want to give them greater sovereignty over a lot of these tools, but that also requires and inherently imposes a lot of the risk that they have to absorb in order to do that. So I think for me, of course, a business should go, and if they don't, then that's a huge red flag. But a business should go through security auditing, and we want to make sure that it's constantly our tools and our blockchain platforms are constantly being audited, are constantly sort of being monitored. But on the user side, I think that that's inherently one of the greatest risks. And I think it mirrors a lot of what happens in non-Web3 spaces where, employees are very often the highest security risk that a company has in terms of how they might share data or what they might do with attachments or how they might talk about certain things within, Slack or something like that. And so I think, it's not unique to blockchain, but inherently I do believe that in this desire to sort of give users so much empowerment that we are also imposing a lot of risk, and the risk management strategies around that need to be a lot of thoroughly thought out work. And there just needs to be ongoing security maintenance and monitoring.
Okay, and can you give me any examples of successful Web3 projects and explain what made them successful?
That's an interesting one. I mean, obviously, I'm very biased toward the projects that we've worked on, but I think, not to toot our own horn, but to actually highlight other projects that I think are quite interesting. I think at a protocol level, in terms of brand engagement with Web2, I think Polygon has done a very fantastic job at onboarding brands into Web3 and having them consider NFT routes as possible ways in which they can sort of dip their toes, which I think has been quite successful. I think on the NFT front, there's been a lot of progress in terms of how to use it for different types of environmental markets. So whether it's plastic recovery markets in the way that plastics does, or whether it's through, trying to clean up a little bit of the carbon, credit market, whether it's to design a more robust biodiversity credit market or renewable energy credits market. I think all of those are potential use cases that are very interesting. I think we've seen really successful use cases in supply chain, whether it's coffee, as we've done, or cocoa, which we've also done. There's also really interesting use cases in fish or, in other kinds of provenance related issues. And we're about to actually enter the space of medical grade cannabis. And I think that there's a lot of value in inherently tracing things that are often sold in the black market and where the integrity is on that. So I think there's been a lot of success there. I think, on the finance side, there's been lots of opportunity to innovate and have success. But I think, to me, what's interesting is that inherently this has been a very financially oriented technology. And yet I would say that a lot of the innovation in Web3 mirrors a lot of the existing innovation in Web2. And so I would say, I am very hopeful that we start breaking some of these molds and that we start looking into other financial mechanisms that don't necessarily mirror or reflect the loan structures or the types of financial instruments that the Web2 world has sort of gotten very wealthy off of in some cases. And then I think the play to earn, earning, rewarding, incentive structure has been quite interesting for me, like loyalty programs or play to earn games have seen some success. And so I think these are all bits and pieces of what are these fundamental trends that I think are shaping the future of where we want to go with this, in the sense of saying, okay, we want to give people sovereignty over their data and their behavior online. And then we want to reward and incentivize people to engage in particular ways. So I think that thread has been very successful through the history of blockchain development. And then I think on a, protocol level, I think there's been some very interesting pieces that are coming in terms of data storage, in terms of, layer 0, layer 2 innovation. And I think that those are all very, very important as well.
Okay, so my next question, have you ever worked on a Web3 project that failed, and what did you learn from that experience?
That's an interesting question, because inherently what we do as a company is to set precedents that sort of move the needle forward on this social impact, sustainable development approach to blockchain and AI. So I think what's interesting is that it's a very, very immature ecosystem. And so to say something's critically failed, unless it's been a rug pull, I think would be premature maybe. I think I've been part of projects that had a pilot and then didn't scale, but continue to either run pilots or have taken pieces of that initial pilot and then reworked a second pilot. So I don't know that I would say I've ever been a part of a failed blockchain project, but I've definitely seen them and I've bought into them for sure. But I think, again, unless they're actively pulling or something's gone fundamentally wrong ethically, I think for the most part, there's a lot of unfinished work in the blockchain space. And I think that it's too premature to call it a failed project in most cases, as it relates to me.
Okay. And what excites you most about the future of Web3 technology?
I think if we get it right, and if we understand how to use technology to mirror the fundamental changes that are shaping society as it moves forward, I think there's so much exciting potential in inclusion and in an ability to generate revenue and pro-poor growth strategies that will actually have really meaningful impact in lessening the curve of inequality. And I think that, to me, is probably very exciting and just the most exciting element of it is this idea that you could do that. And then on top of that, I think this opportunity to redefine value in what are inherently very let's say money-oriented financial systems. I think this idea that we could create value economies out of, successful outcomes in environmental investment, out of, helping and supporting communities, out of enabling, the inclusion of certain, historically marginalized population segments. I think this opportunity to say, we've had a very clear definition of value that has led to one particular economic system that is majorly adopted around the world. But to challenge that and say, actually, we can build and redefine value dynamics and assign value to things that are critically important, but maybe harder slightly to assign like a numerical value to, but should still play a role in determining the volatility and value of a financial instrument, or that should still have incentives associated to it. I think the opportunity to do that and to say we redefine value, and we, in the way that we redefine it, we make room for people to elevate their economic position and to reduce the amount of inequality there is. I think that convergence for me is the most exciting thing about Web3. And I'm not saying that it's a necessary future. It's not, it doesn't have to happen in this way. I would love for it to happen in this way. But I'm saying that it is possible just in the direction of the tools that we are opening up and making available through the blockchain ecosystem. And I think it's worth it for organizations, governments, companies, people all around the world to just see, what these tools are and explore them and try building with them or try leveraging them and using them. Because ultimately, we guide the direction of technology. So concerted effort to do the right thing here is possible. And I think that that's a very exciting thing for me.
Actually, that's a really great answer. Thank you. And I have last question for you for today. What do you think is the biggest risk facing the Web3 ecosystem in the next few years?
I think bad actors are a very big risk that we need to talk about. There seems to be, in any new industry or any new sector, I think we generally have a moment of regulatory unclarity or non-clarity, and we've got all of these opportunities where we're inherently designing new business models and new things that maybe we don't have a sort of set idea of how they're going to play out in the future. And so I think there's a lot of risk in doing the unknown. And I think that there's a lot of risk in letting bad actors do the unknown. And so I think one of the biggest risks that I personally feel really strongly about is being able to call out bad actors as an industry ourselves, and being able to be proactive about protecting our space and protecting the users that we're hoping adopt the technologies that we're building. And the only way that we really get to this moment of true trust in our industry is when we deserve it. And I think that requires being hyper aware and vigilant about the way that bad actors can come in and play a key role in the definition of the sector to our own detriment. So I think that would be probably one of the biggest risks. And I also think a second thing is, not pressing enough on multi-blockchain approaches. Like, we really need to work cohesively as an industry to be able to enable these ecosystems to speak to each other, to collaborate. We are entering an economic era of competitive collaboration, where competitors sometimes compete, but sometimes collaborate for the good of industries or for the good of society. And I think it's really exciting that we're living this moment, but we need to reflect that with our technology. And so we need to be able to enable communication intra-blockchain, and we need to be able to communicate across platforms and across wallet ecosystems and across communities and across DAOs. And so I think this idea of replicating or trying to achieve decentralization through very siloed protocol ecosystems or through very siloed, protocol specific platforms and tools, I think that will be as well to our own detriment.
Okay, Lucia, thank you so much. It was really nice to talk to you today.